So you'll notice on your chair that thankfully, to start off the new year, we have what? A map. Thank goodness we've got a map. So I also have some pencils that I want to start passing around too for those of you who enjoy doodling or writing while you're in class. And this is an activity, of course, that you can take home, and hopefully you'll be finished with it by the time we can conclude our study. But as you notice on here, it's paint by what? Numbers. Excellent. And so we're going to do that. And you'll notice on here it's like paint by numbers that all of you have done before, that our plan is to look at the first 10 chapters, and you'll see color number 1 spread all over the map because it's sandy and desert environments. You've got a lot of brown. You'll see the blue. You'll see the Gulf, the Red Sea, the Nile River, the Mediterranean, and so on. That'd be all blue. And on we go, chapters 10 to 20, which will start next week. You'll see some purple and black. Then as we finish up in chapters 20 to 36, we've got some more purple, and then thankfully we've got green, because we're looking across to the promised land that is green, and we put all of that desert sand behind us. So this will be, I think, a lot of fun for you to play along with. Now, along with that, we have a fantastic door up here on the stage. You may wonder what the door is all about, and Abby is going to be nice enough to explain this to us. A few weeks ago when we were talking about what our next painting could be that Abby could help us with, she said, we talked about doing something where we could have kind of a larger palette, and she said, maybe a door would work well. So Judy and I were in southwestern Oklahoma a few weeks ago, in just a thriving metropolis of Altus, Oklahoma. So you guys know where that is, Bob? Yes, you do. You know where it is, Mac? And we went into a antique store. This door was there. We brought it back from Oklahoma. So I'll let Abby introduce the purpose behind this door, and we'll get us started.
It's a great door, and it has feet that came on it. So it's not this wrestling it with a chair or table or figuring out some way for it to stand while we work on it. So yes, I was greeted at the door this morning with, I've never seen anyone bring their door to church before. Go figure. Okay, one comment about your paint by number paper. You've got some numbers. I did not make this, but only because I have done the prep for this, I noticed a problem with your paint by numbers. Mr. Perfection. Okay. You'll notice that there are some numbers in the same space without a dividing line. Okay, so now you are challenged to use your creativity. 1 is brown, 6 is green. What color will you color it? Or maybe you'll layer it and do both, right? Okay, there you go. So, problem solved. I get a kick out of this whole paint by numbers thing. And when he told me about the door, they sent pigs. Originally, I was going to do one painting and would be the similar, like the whole thing would be one design. But we have options now to create different panels in this, and to even possibly use the back for the promised land. So this is pretty cool. So this last week, I'll just go through this. I wanted to share too.
So I told Abby that she now needs to be careful what she says, since we're recording everything that happens in the class. So she's having to rewrite her entire script right now on the fly.
This is already out of my comfort zone, okay? I think I'm being immortalized on YouTube forever. Okay, so this morning it dawned on me, where did paint by numbers come from? I mean, have we ever thought about what's the history of paint by numbers, right? So we looked it up this morning, and 2 explanations caught my eye. One is says Dan Robbins was the 13th employee of Palmer Paint Company, who read that Da Vinci taught all of his apprentices the foundation of painting by using numbers on the canvas. He thought that the idea was great and that it would have some level of wider appeal. Okay, that's pretty cool. And another entry In the 1960s, the phrase by the numbers became a metaphor for following instructions, doing things by the book, a kind of anti-creativity. The 1990s saw the paint-by-number kits regaining popularity, and the paintings from the original kits became collector's items. And they are today. And you can go to Texas Art Supplies, and they do have paint-by-numbers, really cool little kits. And but I thought, I probably won't find the deserts or landscapes of Moab in their collection at Texas Art Supplies, so I designed my own. This is what I came up with. And it's smaller, but I want to work in panels here. So this is the size of the panel. We have a representation of a landscape, some grasses, some trees, the sky, some desert area. And to me, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the children of Israel who are led out into this barren land. And what would they see? Well, it's not going to be civilized, right? It's going to be a barren land. There's not a lot of fruit trees. It's not the promised land, right? So panel 1 will be this landscape. And then I will be using the paint-by-number technique to go and paint this in. And to get it on the canvas today, and if you do any paint-by-numbers yourself, step 2, yeah, you're giggling, right? Because you're all going to go home and just jump right into this. I would trace the original design, correcting any of the lines that I want to correct at that time. And then to get it on, you can use carbon paper, but I couldn't find mine at home. And so I just used a chalk pastel, black. And you can scribble over, create a copy or a thin sheet of the carbon, so to speak, but it's not, it's chalk. And then I'll use that to transfer my design onto the panel. And then those who have pastels, if you keep them in rice, they keep them nice and fresh for you, and they never get sticky and pasty. So there's your tip for the tray for today. That was free. So, and full of tips. And we're going to be doing this painting in oil this time, and I think it's going to give us a depth and a glaze and a classicism that pretty much only oil painting can do. And I think it's going to be beautiful. That's not speaking to my talents, it's speaking to the medium. So we'll see if we can partner those two together. So there you go.
So you've got your paint by numbers you can follow along as Abby goes. And so Judy and I were working on this the other day, and if you paint by numbers, this is what it could look like. But as Abby mentioned, the paint by numbers idea, you like that? No, I give credit to Judy on this. But again, if you think about where the origination of paint by numbers came about, it was really working against creativity. Stay within the lines, don't get outside the box, stay in your lane. So you're lucky to be in a class where we don't adhere to any of that. So you don't have to worry about it. So if you want to put a blue pencil where number 1 is in the brown, that's okay with me. If you want to color outside the lines, that's okay too. So anyway, I think we'll have some fun with this. Let's move on to chapter 3 in the book of Numbers. Hopefully you had an opportunity to read through 3 through 10 for this week, and there was some extra reading in Exodus 13, and also some extra reading in Exodus 40. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but I believe that we can be able to get through those chapters before they rise up, follow the cloud, and head out. And that's what we'll be talking about next week. But this week, it's more preparation time. And you'll recall the first 2 chapters were arranging the tribes into their own groups and their clans and their families. We've identified the leadership in those tribes and those clans. We've got them set with the Levites being near the tabernacle as protection for the other people, as well as serving in the tabernacle and doing all the things necessary to be clean and holy to approach a holy God. And then the other tribes around that. And which tribe did we talk about last week would be the first one facing east? You remember? Judah, exactly, right? So Judah's there. The Levites are right next to them, also facing east. And then you have Reuben, and you have Ephraim, and then Dan would be the fourth division, and then you would have the tribes and clans underneath each one of those divisions. So we spent a little bit of time going through that preparation work of getting the tribes all set around the tabernacle area. The people have been working there for about a year, somewhere around 12 to 13 months, and they've been doing a lot of preparation as well. And we talked last week about what seems to be a little tedious in going through all of the names of the tribes and where you're all lined out. And you remember also that we talked about the counting, which is where the Greek and the English word for this book of Numbers came from, because they were counting the people in these tribes and clans and families to find out who is physically able to be in the army. Because this is going to be an army marching under God's banner, moving toward this promised land, and they're going to run into some resistance, so they needed to have an army. So we had some counting that took place as part of that. So it's probably best maybe just to back up a couple of verses into chapter 2. In verse 34 in chapter 2 in Numbers, it says, "So the Israelites did everything the Lord commanded Moses. That is the way they encamped under their standards, and that is the way they set out, each with his clan and family." So that's where we are as we prepare now for chapter 3 and chapter 4. And so we got the clans all set, and in chapter 3 we're going to talk about the Levites and them being prepared to also take their place and how they prepared to be a holy people set apart for God. And you may remember when we did some counting with the clans that the Levites were not included in the count. They're set apart. We will see in our lesson today that they do get counted because why? It's the book of Numbers and we count. So we're going to count the Levites, but it's a separate count set apart for God, not to be part of the army, but to be part of the holy group that takes care of the tabernacle. So in 3 verse 1 it says, "This is the account of the family of Aaron and Moses at the time the Lord talked with Moses on Mount Sinai," and that's where they're camped right now. And you can see on that fantastic map that you have, you see where Sinai is down at the bottom with that little arrowhead there. And so that's where they're camping, and that's where they've been for the past 12 months or so. And it says, "Those were the names of Aaron's son, the anointed priest, who were ordained to serve as priests. Nadab and Abihu, however, fell dead before the Lord when they made an offering with unauthorized fire before him in the desert of Sinai. They had no sons." This is the two boys who fell dead. They had no sons. So only Eleazar and Ithamar served as priests during the lifetime of their father Aaron. Did anyone stop just for a minute as you were reading through this and you said, wow, what happened there? These two boys did something and they were struck dead right there in the spot. But it's only just one sentence in this discussion, isn't it? There's really no explanation. What in the world took place? That's pretty dramatic that something happened, they fell dead, and then we just moved on. If you go back into Leviticus 10, and you are welcome to turn back into that area, and Leviticus 10 gives us a little bit of detail on what happened with these two boys. And you'll notice in Leviticus 10, verse 1, now we see Aaron's son, same ones we just saw. Nadab and Abihu took their censers. These are metal devices that you put coals inside. They took their censers, put fire in them, added incense, and they offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, contrary to his command. So fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Moses then said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord spoke of when he said, 'Among those who approach me, I will show myself holy in the sight of all the people. I will be honored.' And Aaron remained silent." And if you go down to verse 7, it even goes a step further. In verse 7, it says, "Do not leave the entrance to the tent of meeting, or you will die, because the Lord's anointing oil is on you." So they did as Moses said. The other brothers weren't allowed to touch their dead brothers. They had to bring in relatives to bring them out of there. Very dramatic, but the key to me is in the middle verse there in 3, where God is talking about holiness. And if you approach me, you do it in the way that I specify, because I'm a holy God, and this is the only way you can come to me. And if not, there's a harsh penalty that goes along with that. And clearly, someone comes with unauthorized fire. We're not sure what that means, but whatever it was, they didn't follow the rules, and they were struck down. Would that send a message to the rest of the community? I think it would. I think it would. I think if you were watching that, as horrible as that event took place, you would say there is something going on here that God is demanding a certain respect and an order because he's a holy God. And in order to do his work for him, we need to be in line with that. And if we're not, there's a punishment for that. And this is a very dramatic punishment, of course, but it clearly sent a message to the other people. This is what God expects. We talked a little bit last week, and we'll see it some more this week, about the role of the Levites. You remember they were camped right behind Judah, facing east in an area of prominence, but close to the tabernacle because they're serving that. And I mentioned to you that one of their roles, it's not just the offerings and the other things necessary for God, but one of their roles is to be a buffer to the people, to be around that tabernacle, a holy place, and to keep people away to prevent this kind of thing happening. So if someone in the community out there thought, I wonder what's going on inside of that tent, I'd like to go up and see. They're placed right around that tent, and they would make sure that no one got close to it for the protection of the people. And this is an issue that we've already seen here with Nadab and Abihu. So we clearly have a serious issue going on when you want to be holy before a holy God. And so we go on back in Numbers chapter 3, verse 5. It says, the Lord said to Moses, bring the tribe of Levi and present them to Aaron, the priest, to assist him. They are to perform duties for him and for the whole community. So they take care of what they need to do as their tribe, but they're also providing the substitution and the offerings for all of the community, because they're the ones that are going to be close to the tent. Everyone else, you stay away. They're to take care of all the furnishings of the tent of meeting, fulfilling the obligations of the Israelites by doing the work of the tabernacle. Give to the Levites, to Aaron and his sons. They are the Israelites, are to be given wholly to him. So within the tribe of Levi, you have Aaron and his sons. We've lost two, but he has two others. And these are to be the priests, the ones who actually go into the tent, and they're part of the Levites who are doing the other work. You see here taking care of the furnishings. And what we'll see here, and part of this, what seems a little tedious, we'll see shortly, is all of the accounting for all of these furnishings. And so when that cloud lifts and they head out, these Levites have certain responsibilities. This group of Levites here, they grab all the ropes that are part of the tent, and the other one grabs the poles, and this one grabs the lampstand, and this one grabs this, that, and the other, and they all have an assignment that goes on with that. And the responsibility of Aaron and his priest sons is to make sure that all gets carried out the way God would have it to be carried out, and no one makes any errors. So in verse 10, appoint Aaron and his sons to serve as priests. Anyone else who approaches the sanctuary must be put to death. It's a serious business. Serious business here. And the Lord also said to Moses, I have taken the Levites from among the Israelites in place of the first male offspring of every Israelite woman. The Levites are mine, for all the firstborn are mine. In the next sentence, he does a flashback, if you will, to Exodus 13, which was part of your reading. And if you read that part of Exodus 13, you'll recall they had just come out of Egypt. You recall that? Exodus 12 is all about the Passover. Trying to get Pharaoh's attention, let my people go, and he kept ramping it up, and finally all of the firstborn that did not have the covering of the blood were killed. And so in chapter 13, following that Passover description, is this discussion here about those firstborn Israelites who were saved because of the blood over the doorposts. God said back in chapter 13 of Exodus, these are mine, because I saved them from destruction. And so he called them out and said, these are mine. And now the transition is taking place here a few months later where he says, but now I've set the Levites apart to be the ones that serve my temple and are to be holy and the only ones here. And some of those firstborn, right after the Passover, were not Levites. They were mixed in all kinds of tribes. You know, mothers had children all over the place. So how do we take these firstborn that he says in chapter 13 of Exodus? They're mine. I want these children. So he makes a substitution that we see here, and he says, now I'm going to bring together the Levites, and I'm going to substitute the firstborn after the Passover, and now the Levites are going to take their place. This is a real indication, and we'll see more of it in our study today, about this substitution that takes place. And we as Christians have a substitution as well, don't we? Jesus Christ, who is a substitute for us, the judgment that we should have had on us, and he became the substitution. We see all throughout the Old Testament, and certainly in these first 5 books, the substitution of an animal. Blood was shed, a substitution for person's sins. And so now he's going to make a substitution for the Levites. And he says in 13, when I struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, I set apart for myself every firstborn in Israel, whether man or animal, they are to be mine. I am the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses in the desert, count the Levites by their families and clans. So we have more of this counting that takes place, as you can imagine. So since they weren't counted for the army, now they'll be counted as the Levites, their own group of people set aside underneath Aaron and his sons. And it goes on in verse 16, so Moses counted them as he was commanded by the Lord. And you can see the names of the sons under Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari, and then the other clans beyond that. And so chapter 3 continues to go on and talk about these primary sons of Levi who are going to be controlling what's happening around the temple. And you'll also notice that as you go through chapter 3, not only is the discussion about each of these clans, but what their responsibility is. This group here, you're going to take care of the poles and the ropes and so on, and this group over here is going to take care of some of the furnishings and some of the silverware and other things like that inside. This group over here is going to take care of the tent and haul it out. And hopefully what you see here too is the attention to detail that is laid out here about what they're going to be doing. All about detail for the purpose of making sure they get it right, because we've already seen in chapter 3, 2 people have died as a result of not doing it right, and then there's a warning, anyone who gets near, you're going to be put to death. So again, it's another reason for numbers and why for us it's tedious, but why it was so important for these people to understand that you're working with a holy God and not to be taken lightly. And then as you get to verse 39, it says the total number of Levites counted at the Lord's command by Moses and Aaron, according to their clans, is including every male a month old or more, 22,000. And the Lord then says, count all the firstborn Israelite males. Chapter 13, Exodus, all those firstborn. I'm going to make a substitution. So I'd like to count how many firstborn were back there after the Passover and were saved and were called as mine. And I'm making a substitution of the Levites. I've just counted them, so I know how many Levites I've got. I want to know how many I had that I called as the firstborn and are mine. And we're going to make a switch here. And hopefully it's going to come out to be a one-to-one comparison. And he says in verse 41, take the Levites for me in place of all the firstborn of the Israelites, all the livestock of the Levites in place of all the firstborn of the livestock of the Israelites. I am the Lord. In 42, Moses counted all the firstborn, the total, close. Remember we had 22,000 Levites, and we got 22,273. Pretty close, isn't it? Pretty close. And then because we have 273 more, God says, well, I don't have any more Levites to make it 1 for 1. I'm just slightly over, so we are going to buy them away from God, if you will, and transfer that money then to the Levites for their support of their families and the ministry that they do around the tabernacle. So there was money that was exchanged to take care of the payment of those 273. So it all evens out, and we have a 1-for-1 swap there for a substitution. So as we go into chapter 4 now, we're going to talk about one of these groups, the Kohathites, who are the more ranking sons of Levi. And it says, the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, take a census now of the Kohathite branch of the Levites by their clans and family. Count all the men from 30 to 50 years of age who come to serve in the work of the tent. You may recall last week when we talked about those who came to be the tribes and clans around, like Reuben and Judah and so forth, around the tent. Do you recall what the age was we were looking for there? 20, exactly. And there was no upper limit. It was if you are able to serve in the army, come on. You got to be 20 years old, but there's no limit. If you're able to serve, come on. And so in this it says, count all the men from 30 to 50 years of age. You've got a short span of 20 years, and then that's it. And then you're going to be moved over, you'll retire, and then somebody else will come in with the next generation that comes along. And so you can see here the work of the Kohathites in the tent of meeting, the care of the most holy things in verse 4. And when the camp is to move, Aaron and his sons are to go in and take down the shielding curtain and cover the ark of the testimony with it. So you all are familiar with the inner sanctuary where there was a big curtain, right, separating the people on the outside area from the Holy of Holies. Well, this description here is really a flap over the door, if you will, before you even get into the tent. And so he's saying they are to cover this with the hides of sea cows, spread a cloth of solid blue over that, and put the poles in place. So Aaron and his sons are to go in and take down the shielding curtain and cover the ark of the testimony with it. So we have a thick curtain as you're entering in. When we're going to move, this is how you disassemble the tabernacle, and you do it right. Take the heavy covering over the door, you put that over the ark where God resides. Put that over the ark, and then on top of that, you put some hides of sea cows. On top of that, put a cloth of solid blue over that and put the poles in place where people then can come in from the Levites and grab it by the poles and never touch the ark and never see the ark. They are not even to see what goes on back in there. So if you put a heavy curtain over it, then you put some hides of animals over that, and then you put another cloth on top of that, you're pretty secure, right? Protecting the people so there's no slip up, so nobody accidentally looks or touches what's taking place. And on through chapter 4 is this description of what takes place with every item inside the tent, and you're covering things constantly so no one ever sees it or touches it. But everyone has a role in that. One of the things I've enjoyed over the past couple of weeks, I've had a number of emails and questions from people about numbers. It's not something that's typically studied, so it's natural to have a lot of discussions. And so I've loved the emails, and there was a question that came up about sea cows, and where did that come from? You're in the desert down in Sinai. Where did that come from? Well, you may remember when the people left back in Exodus 12 and 13, Pharaoh was so anxious to get rid of people, the people of Egypt were just throwing silver and gold and everything at these people. Get out. Take the stuff with you. So when you see then things inside the tabernacle made of gold or silver trumpets that we'll see, they had all this stuff as a free gift from the people that were enslaving them when they got out. Same with the sea cows. What I've read is that a sea cow would be something like we would think of as a porpoise. And they crossed the Red Sea. So they're familiar with water, the Nile River and the tributaries and the little seas and things that they've been crossing. And so they would have had access to these kinds of hides that they could carry with them. And so that's where the sea cows come from. I don't think they found them around Mount Sinai. They found these as they were crossing the river. So they've got all of these wonderful resources. And can you see how God has planned this out for them? Enslaved for hundreds of years. Finally, after the firstborn were killed of the Egyptians and they went out, the people showered them with all kinds of money and jewels and precious metals, and now we have sea cows on top of that, and God will use that then as part of His work. But what wonderful preparation by God to have that ready. So going on through chapter 4, you see this worship that's being done by these clans of Levi, and all of the numbering that takes place. And as we get to the end in verse 46 in chapter 4, so Moses, Aaron, and the leaders of Israel counted all the Levites by their clans and families, all the men from 30 to 50 years of age who came to do the work of serving and carrying the tent of meeting numbered 8,580. And at the Lord's command through Moses, each was assigned his work and told what to carry. Thus they were counted as the Lord commanded Moses. So again, it's tedious reading in some respects, but I hope you begin to see now what we're looking at in these chapters, the purpose behind what we see as, is a lot of detail here. But when you're told by God, if you make a misstep somewhere, you look at something, you touch something, you enter in the wrong place, you do it the wrong way, you're under threat of death, God is not wanting to have people come forward and to be killed. He wants people to know the right way to approach Him and to worship a holy God. And so that's why we have this detail that we see here. So keep that in mind as you read through these, and it seems like it's kind of tedious. God does the same thing for us today. We have this entire book of instruction for us, that we know how to approach a holy God, that our act of worship and our sacrifice that we offer is designed to come to Him in a particular way, not in a way that's just cavalier, it's specific. So if you look at chapters 5 and 6, something is changing here. We've been talking a lot about counting, ways to do certain things, and all of a sudden we hit chapter 5 and it's like you put the brakes on the car. It's like, what's happened? This is very different. We stop here. And in chapter 5, now we're looking at, we've had the tribes arranged, we've had the Levites arranged, they've had their instructions, they know what to do, so now we're going to move out beyond the Levites into the people. How do the people stay pure? How do the people approach a holy God? How do they work with the Levites to do this in the right way that God wants us to do? So we see a beautiful picture in chapters 5 and 6 of God caring for people, for us. It's been doing that for 3,500 years when this was written up to today. He still cares about us to the point he even sent his own son who died for us. He left behind us lots of material that we can read. And so he's always been looking to take care of us. And so he does that and begins that here. And you see in chapter 5, the Lord said to Moses, "Command the Israelites to send away from the camp anyone who has an infection, skin disease, or a discharge of any kind, ceremonially unclean because of a dead body." And he goes on and talks about other people who have committed an offense against your neighbor. And then we have a really interesting rest of chapter 5 where there is a way for a man who believes his wife has been unfaithful to try to discern the truth of that. And there is no proof. This is a man who just believes, who suspects that the wife has done something improper. What I really like about what I see in this is that God caring for all parts of us. You have somebody who's ceremonially unclean, some kind of a skin disease, which just happens, and it's not anyone's fault. And then you have somebody who does commit a sin against their neighbor. They've taken advantage in some way, and God even says, here's the remedy for that. You pay it back in full, and you're going to pay a tax on top of that so you remember it, right? You pay it in full plus another fifth on top of that so you don't do this again. Caring about our neighbors, caring about our community, caring about even in the family and your spouse. And what I like, even though, did anyone think that starting in verse 11, this unfaithful wife and the remedy that goes through, did that look a little unfair to anyone? It did. Everyone's shaking. The men are not shaking their hand, but the women are going like this. Right. I wonder why that is. Certainly seems a little harsh, doesn't it, that you've got no proof whatsoever, but there's a suspicion that something's going on. Linda, you a little concerned about this, aren't you? Aren't you glad you live in New Testament times now? But let's look for a minute see what we might be able to learn about what's going on here for this test with an unfaithful wife. What I want you to see here is that there are clear directions for these relationships with people, the community. Remember, these people are working together. And the whole purpose of all of this is so we know how to approach God, but it's also how we interact with neighbors. These people are soon going to be standing up and marching through countrysides, through people who are worshiping gods made of stone and metal and all kinds of other things that they'll be witnessing. And these are the people that are going to be reflecting what it looks like to be God's children. So God wants them to be prepared for that and know how to relate to each other and care for each other. You got 2 million people out there. You're going to have interactions that sometimes go off the track, right? It just happens. And so God wants to restore that all the way down to the family. And it says in verse 11 in chapter 5, "Then the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, if a man's wife goes astray and is unfaithful to him by sleeping with another man, and this is hidden from her husband, her impurity is undetected since there is no witness against her. She's not been caught in the act. And if feelings of jealousy come over her husband and he suspects his wife and she is impure, or if he's jealous and suspects her even though she is not impure, then he is to take his wife to the priest." Sounds harsh. Here's what I want you to see. At the very beginning in verse 11, it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses." The Lord's involved here, right? This is the Lord's instruction. This is what God is saying. Verse 15, "Then he is to take his wife to the priest. He must also take an offering." In verse 16, "The priest shall bring her and have her stand where? Before God." What I want you to see is that all along, God's involved in this. There's nowhere in here where it says the man brings his own judgment. I have a suspicion. I'm the man, I'm the head of the household. Middle Eastern times, the man was the head of the household. But there's nowhere in here that said the man is running amok and he has some suspicion with no proof and he's able to take it into his own hands and to deliver his own judgment against the wife. That's what I want you to see. God's the one who's putting this out there. God says, you don't take this into your own hands. You go to the priest. And then what does the priest do? Priest comes before God. All of this is done in his sight, so everything is above board. She now stands before the Lord. So she now is going to be required also to be truthful and honest because she's standing before God and before the priest. So everybody now is accountable. We don't have a man that's running wild out there under suspicion trying to do something against his wife. Then he talks about holy water, and in verse 18, after the priest has had the woman stand before the Lord, he shall loosen her hair, meaning she's going to be totally exposed in that time with your hair uncovered. She's going to be completely exposed, meaning that she wants to be truthful. All comes out. We don't hide anything. It's all going to be here. We're in front of God. And the woman in verse 19 to be put under oath and say to her, and he goes on with his instructions. In other words, he wants to know from the woman. You know, he's heard what the man says. There's a suspicion there. But now, before God and the priest, we want to have the testimony now of the woman to be able to be honest about what's taking place. And then, if you go on through the rest of chapter 5, you see the instruction given to the priest about how he understands what happens. And there's an offering that takes place, and if the woman is truthful and nothing took place, she's restored to the community, no harm done, she's able to have children. If she was unfaithful, then there is a punishment that goes along with that where she becomes barren and not able to have children, which is a tremendous disgrace to women in general, but certainly at that time in the Middle East. But that's the key I want you to see. And in 29 it says, "This then is the law of jealousy when a woman goes astray and defiles herself while married to her husband, or when feelings of jealousy come over a man because he suspects his wife." And it's a summary. The priest is to have her stand before the Lord and apply the entire law to her. The husband will be innocent of any wrongdoing, but the woman will bear the consequences of her sin. If she's guilty, there's a consequence. If she's not, everything's fine. It's hard to hear, though, still, isn't it? It's still difficult. But that's what I want you to hear out of that, is that God is looking to keep all of his people pure in our relationships with each other, inside the home. And if there is something that's gone off the track, there's instructions here. So we don't take things in our own hands and do something that we shouldn't. And that's what the key is there in 5. Then in 6, we have someone that shows up on the scene called a Nazirite. It's a little bit different than what we see in the New Testament with John the Baptist. But this is for men and women who are placing a special vow before God that they want to be separated out specially. There's something they want to do to spend time with God and to be at a holy time with him and to have that communication with God, purify themselves, and have a closer relationship with him. And so this chapter is all about this person called a Nazirite who wants to separate themselves out and be holy. You'll see some things in here as you look at this that they do some of the things the Levites do. For example, they don't drink alcohol. That's one thing. But there's also something they do that goes above and beyond what the Levites do. They're asked not to cut their hair. The Levites, back in Exodus, in their instruction on what a Levite look like, they are to have neatly trimmed hair. But in this, it says the men and the women will not cut their hair. It'll be long. Maybe, I don't know, I'm not going to say straggly, but it'll be long and look different than the other men and women that are in your community. What the people are doing is to really be an example, by thinking about this hair, to be an example to the people inside all of the community. And as they march out, and they're going to be spending a lot of time marching, and as these people take this vow, they don't drink alcohol, they dress in a certain way, they keep themselves clean, they do not cut their hair, all of the other people in the community who have not taken this vow will see that person walking among them, just a regular person, but they'll see them stand out, and you'll be able to say, oh, that's one of the Nazirites. They've separated themselves out for a period of time. And I think what God is trying to show the other people who see the Nazirites walking among the community is to say, people who trim their hair, look very nice. They are a civilized people, a good people. But it also reflects what the world has to say about us. And when you see the Nazirite walking around with the hair that's long and unkempt, it's saying this is a person that is not of this world, not chasing what the world would have us be. I think it's another example for the people to look at a Nazirite who's walking among their community and saying, we too are a special people. And we too are to be separated out. And we too are not to be following what the world has to say, but instead we're to be following what God has to say. So I think there's two purposes here for a person to be pulled out and separated, spend some time with God, but also to be an example to the people when they look at them and they say, we are not to be of the world either. We're to be called and separated specifically to God. Let's see if we can get through the rest of chapter 6, and then I think next week we can scoot through 7, 8, and 9 pretty quickly. Because of the 7, 8, and 9. In fact, chapter 7, if you read it, boy, you talk about tedium. Did anyone go off the rails on chapter 7? Oh, my goodness, everyone's shaking their head. I'll just say real briefly on chapter 7 before I talk and close on the end of chapter 6. Chapter 7 is tedious, like much of the rest of the Numbers. But chapter 7 is taking a look at the people about how these offerings are done and preparing the temple for dedication. And as you look through here, this is the longest chapter in all of the first 5 books of the Old Testament that Moses wrote. So it is lengthy, and it is tedious, and it has all kinds of information. It goes through each of the 12 tribes, doesn't it? And did you notice that this chapter, in my opinion, could have been done in 5 verses, or maybe 6? Instead, we have dozens of verses, the longest chapter in all of the Pentateuch. What in the world's going on? The reason I say you could do it in a few verses is because every one of the verses under each one of the 12 clans and tribes, it's identical. Did you notice that? You kept reading the same words over and over again, and you're going, what is going on? I love this picture of what God is doing, that sameness over and over again for these people, because God is saying, look, each of you tribes are different. Go back to chapter 1, they all hold different numbers of people, right? This tribe has a few more than this tribe does. Some tribes are placed differently, right? Judah's at the head, Reuben's over here, Dan's over here, right? They're all different places, different sizes, different people. Everyone comes differently. But God specifically went through every one of these tribes in painful detail with the exact same offering that they're going to bring. So each of the tribes could say, I'm worshiping a holy God, and God now has just instructed me on how to work with my neighbor, the community, inside my family. We have a holy God who's going to be leading us out and caring for us. I want to make an offering back to this holy God who cares for me. And everyone has the same equal access before God, whether you're a man or a woman, whether you're a rich tribe or a poor tribe, whether you're a small tribe or a big tribe, before God, all the same. All the same. And so for us today, when we have a holy God and a Lord Jesus who died for us, don't we have the same for us? A man and a woman approaches God exactly the same way. Someone with a lot of money or not a lot of money, just the same. We all approach it the same way. We all enter into His grace exactly the same way. There are no favorites. There are no special provisions. Would you agree? And so God is laying out that same principle to these people, no matter where you are. Dan, in your tribe, you think you're at the bottom of the pile, and Judah, you're at the top of the pile? Now, I arrange you that way for a particular purpose, but it's not that you are better or greater or you have special access to God. We all have equal access before God. So it's a long chapter. It's a challenge. The repetition was for a purpose. That in God's eyes, we all come the same. We all come the same. Beautiful. Well, let's close here in chapter 6. We'll just back up a little bit. In verse 22, I've mentioned before, you've heard Bishop Hayes say this blessing that was handed down to Aaron. And you've heard this many times before. And it said, the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron and his sons, this is how you are to bless the Israelites, and say to them, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. the Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. And so they, Aaron and his sons, they will put my name on the people and will bless them. What I'd like you to look at here and why this comes about at the very end of this is because we now have transitioned just before chapter 7 with this relationship that the people have to God. And so Aaron and his sons, who are the priests, are now going to bless the people before they head out and know that God is with them. And you notice you've got really 3 primary verses here. And look at the connection. I like the action that God has. Verse 24, the Lord bless you. Active. He's blessing the people. And he says, I'm going to keep you. Protection. You're under my banner. You're under my protection. I care for you. I'm blessing you. I want to keep you. While you're under my banner, you're protected. 25, the Lord make his face shine upon you. That action again, his face shining, and be gracious to you. The penalty that we should take, God says, I am going to be gracious to you. I have mercy toward you and gracious toward you. And then in 26, the Lord turn his face. You see that action of turning his face and looking at the people, looking at each of us, and turning his face toward you and giving you peace. And this is peace beyond what we think of. We like to think of things like war and peace. It's kind of the opposite of that. We want to be safe. We don't want war. We don't want harm to come. But in Hebrew, it's the word shalom, peace, which means it's every part of your life. Your relationships with people are in a right relationship. Security that you have under God's umbrella is there. Every aspect of your physical life, your spiritual life, it's all at peace and harmony with God and with your fellow neighbor, and with your spouse, and with your children. And so God says, I'm going to turn my face toward you and give you shalom. And that's what it's going to look like in the promised land. That's what God is setting up, that this is what it's going to look like. You follow me, and you'll have rest, you'll have protection, you'll have peace, you'll have shalom, and God will be merciful and gracious to the people there. So I want Abby to say maybe just a final word here, but I've asked Ken to play this song. It runs about a minute and a half. I just want you to listen to this blessing and just think about what God is saying to the people, that I am your protector and your provider. I'm blessing you. I'm keeping you. I'm holding on to you. I want to be gracious to you. I'm turning my face toward you and keeping you in peace and shalom. So, Ken?
The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord lift his countenance upon you and give you peace, and give you peace, and give you peace, and give you peace. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you, and be gracious. The Lord be gracious, gracious unto you. Amen, amen,
That was beautiful. And that really speaks to my heart this morning. As you leave, you're welcome to come up and see the sketch, the process here. I will probably have this bit completed on the other panels, so you don't have to watch that process again. But then we'll begin to put the color in and tell our story. Let's just bow our heads in prayer. Lord, you are good. Oh, Lord, you are good. When there's nothing good in me, you, my God, forever reign. Help us to keep our eyes turned to you this week. Help us to show grace as you are gracious to us. Help us to love as you love us. Help us to give as you freely give to us. Prepare our paths. Help us to walk straight. Heavenly Father, you are mighty. You are good. And I pray that we bring you glory as we walk in obedience to you. And we thank you for all things. Amen.